Post-punk began in earnest, with the emergence of bands like the lo-fi Suicide and art rockers Talking Heads. Psycho killer has to say, as well as the release of rock icon David Bowie's experimental album, Low, a haunting new direction not just for the famously chameleonic songwriter, but for popular music. Dozens, if not hundreds of bands rode this dark wavelength during the late 70s, and all throughout the 80s. During the 90s, the movement existed underground, but it returned with a vengeance in the early 2000s, finding mainstream acceptance thanks to bands like Interpol. LCD Sound System. Arcade Fire. And Block Party. Who rediscovered the chilling sounds of guitar smothered in delay and reverb, robotic rhythm, and mournful wailing vocals. Post-punk film followed the same pattern. Evening. After the wrecking ball of New Hollywood and the French New Wave made anything possible grammatically, the first post-punk films were made by a studio insider like David Bowie. In this case, Robert Altman. He made a string of films that were deliberately cold and dissonant. They subverted genres and showed a world capable of falling silent around their tortured protagonists. McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Images, and Quintet did for film what Bowie's Berlin trilogy, the albums Low, Heroes, and Lodger did for music. They opened a refuge from modern trends, a retreat into a place defined by a style cobbled together from the scraps of culture demolished by punk energy. Other early post-punk touchstones have lots of fun stripping their respective genres down to their barest ideas. Popular forms echo through their corridors. Soon, it becomes a movement. Movies crop up all over the world, largely science fiction, a genre of recombined, repurposed ideas. Directors like Pyotr Zolkin, Andrei Zulawski, David Cronenberg, Leos Carax, and Lars von Trier begin treating their respective cityscapes as if they were images from a bleak future. Their governments had rendered so many population centers uninhabitable to normal people. So these filmmakers treated them like they were the last refuge for mankind on Earth. The heavy production design was a manifestation of the apocalyptic dread people experienced as tensions grew between the United States and the rest of the world, specifically Eastern European countries, whose damp streets would light up art house screens everywhere. Big empty streets stood in for the silence generated around guitars stabbing holes in the fabric of sound. The cold production is mocked by the sub-zero temperatures nagging at the film's heroes. A few filmmakers kept the movement alive during the 90s.
What need of so much news from abroad, while all that concerns either life or death is all transacting and at work within me.
And in some cases, attempted to bridge the gap between the independents and the mainstream. Like post-punk music, there was a resurgence in the early 2000s. Many of these films are studies in isolation, showcasing how difficult it is to be alone in the modern era. Noisy digital or 16mm frames strand protagonists. Post-punk films fold reference points, whether generic or extraneous, into the fabric of their narratives. Rock music and literature were frequently used as marginalia by post-punk bands to help draw people into their hermetic worlds. Post-punk films define themselves as much by what rules they don't follow, as through the works of art upon which they've built their foundations. Implicit in subverting the rules of popular filmmaking is making audiences realize that they're not watching the films that play by those rules.
For in his dotage, Thomas Edison Sr. had developed a weakness for music of the lighter kind.
And so filmmakers frequently color even further outside the lines, knowing that the artifice of creation has already been pointed out. Big emotions are frequently dulled by a socio-political current. Ian Curtis of Joy Division's monotone masked a bottomless well of torment deep within his soul. That same attitude applies to the direction and the performances, with filmmakers finding unconventional ways to express themselves in overwhelming circumstances. Politics must be radical and humane.
Chew up all the selfish scheming and ill intentions that men like you force upon men like me!
This frequently manifests itself in an ironic appropriation of decadence. By showing the ennui and false moral superiority that wealth creates, and the unnecessary rift that class distinctions create between people. These films undercut the apparent opulence of a life of riches.
Let's make records!
In general, you should be able to drop the audio from a given film and replace it with post-punk music, and still have the meaning and feeling of each film clearly communicated to the viewer. There should be a direct analog to some element of the music, whether it's thematic or atmospheric. perhaps most importantly, these films should stay with you, and you can rewatch them whenever you begin to feel like you have no place. That art is your only refuge from an unfeeling world.